Please, bury my daughter, she cried in the rain. Cowboy touched her tiny hand and froze in shock. Her tears fell with the rain, each drop carrying the sound of a love she was still whispering to the child who no longer answered. Somewhere in that endless gray, a stranger's heart was about to remember how it felt to beat again. The road to Dry Creek was nothing but mud and ghosts that night. The storm had rolled in from the hills, thick as smoke and mean as grief. The wind clawed through the empty streets, rattling the shutters of the old mining town where no one lived anymore. But against the stone wall of the shuttered saloon, one woman still breathed. Evelyn Rose sat in the rain, her dress soaked and torn, her hair plastered to her face. In her trembling arms, she held a small child wrapped in a faded pink blanket. The girl's head lay against her chest, still and quiet. Evelyn's lips brushed the child's damp forehead as she rocked her gently, whispering, "Mama's here, baby. Just hold on a little longer." She'd been walking for 2 days since her last plea for help was met with slammed doors and spit on the ground. The fever had taken Hazel 3 nights ago, and the neighbors said to bury her before the body drew wolves. But Evelyn couldn't. Something in her refused to let go. So she walked, barefoot half the way, her faith burning down to its last spark. Through the haze of the rain, a lantern light flickered down the street. A horse's hooves echoed slow and heavy. She looked up, vision blurred by tears. A man rode in from the darkness, broad-shouldered beneath a brown duster, hat pulled low against the rain. His horse snorted, steam rising from its nostrils. The man dismounted, boots sinking into the mud, and studied her from a cautious distance. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel and smoke. Evelyn could barely speak. Her lips trembled as she looked up at him, her eyes red and hollow. "Please," she whispered, "please bury my daughter." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. The storm filled the silence between them. Then slowly he knelt. The brim of his hat dripped steady lines of rain down his coat. He glanced at the bundle in her arms, his jaw tightening as his gloved hand hovered just above the blanket. "What's her name?" he asked softly. "Hazel," Evelyn breathed. "She's all I had." He hesitated before touching the child's tiny hand, more out of respect than disbelief. The small fingers were pale, limp, and then something stopped him cold. Beneath the chill, he felt it, a faint, pulsing warmth. He froze. His heart kicked against his ribs, the same way it had the night his own daughter had stopped breathing years ago. The memory hit him like a bullet. He looked up at Evelyn, eyes wide. "She's not gone." Evelyn blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "What?" "She's still warm." He pressed his fingers beneath the child's wrist, waiting, counting. Then there it was, a tremor, soft but there. "She's still breathing." Evelyn's whole body went rigid. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe herself. Then a sob tore through her, violent and shaking. "No, you don't mean, get up," he said firmly, already pulling off his coat. "We're not burying her." He wrapped the coat around the child and lifted her from Evelyn's arms with surprising gentleness. "There's a cabin up by the ridge. My horse will carry all 3 of us. Come on." Evelyn stared up at him, rain streaking her face, her mind fighting to believe what her heart already knew. Then she rose, her legs weak beneath her. The man offered his hand, rough and warm despite the cold. She took it, gripping tight. They rode through the storm in silence. The cowboy's name, she would later learn, was Silas Ward. His cabin stood at the edge of a dying pine forest, half buried under the weight of years and loneliness. Smoke curled from its chimney, the only sign of life for miles. When they reached it, Silas jumped down first, lifting Hazel into his arms again. Evelyn followed, stumbling through the mud, and as lightning tore across the sky. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar, tobacco, and rain-soaked wood. A fire crackled weakly in the hearth, throwing long shadows across the walls. Silas laid the child gently near the flames, then grabbed a wool blanket and a tin pot of water, warming on the stove. "Get close," he said. "Keep her near the heat." Evelyn obeyed, kneeling beside her daughter, rubbing the girl's small hands between hers. Silas crouched down beside them, his movements steady but tense. He dipped a rag into the hot water, wrung it out, and pressed it gently against Hazel's chest. "Come on, little one," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Don't let the dark take you." He worked fast, checking her breathing, warming her limbs, massaging her chest. His hands were practiced, too practiced for a drifter. Evelyn watched him, her heart hammering. "You've done this before," she whispered. He didn't look at her. Once. Didn't end the way I prayed it would. Hazel's lips parted slightly. A thin sound escaped her throat. A gasp, soft as wind through grass. Silas froze, eyes widening. Evelyn cried out, half laughing, half sobbing. "She's alive." "Easy," Silas said, his voice breaking for the first time. He leaned close, pressing his ear to Hazel's chest. The heartbeat was faint, uneven, but real. He exhaled shakily. "She's fighting." Evelyn covered her mouth, tears streaming. She couldn't stop whispering her child's name over and over, as if it might anchor her to the world. Silas sat back, rubbing his face with trembling hands, trying to quiet the storm in his chest. For the first time in years, he'd pulled someone back from the edge, and it terrified him. Hours passed. The rain softened outside, becoming a steady rhythm against the roof. Evelyn sat with Hazel cradled in her lap near the fire. Silas poured her a cup of water, then sat on the floor across from her. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "You saved her." Silas shook his head. "No, the good Lord did. I just got in the way." She studied him. His face was rugged, his jaw shadowed with days of stubble. There was something in his eyes, grief and guilt, old and heavy, but beneath it, a gentleness she hadn't seen in a long time. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. "Just me and the ghosts," he said. "They're quieter than most folks." Evelyn managed a faint smile. "Maybe not tonight." The corners of his mouth twitched, almost a smile before he looked away. He busied himself with stoking the fire, though the flames didn't need it. He could feel her gaze on him, warm even through the cold damp of his clothes. "Why'd you stop?" she asked after a moment. "Out there in the storm." "You could have kept riding," he hesitated. "Because once someone begged me for help, and I didn't stop. Thought I could outrun what it'd do to me. Turns out some things catch up anyway." The sound of Hazel's faint breathing filled the silence. Evelyn's hand stroked her daughter's hair, the motion steady, grateful. "Then maybe tonight you outran it," she said quietly. Silas looked at her again, the firelight soft on her face, on the wet strands of hair clinging to her cheek. For a second, the storm outside didn't matter. The years between them and peace didn't matter. All he saw was the curve of a mother's love and the fragile line between loss and life, and he wanted, just once, to believe that line could hold. He reached forward, adjusting the blanket over Hazel's shoulders. His knuckles brushed Evelyn's hand. She didn't pull away. Outside, the wind began to fade. The rain turned to a whisper against the glass. Evelyn leaned her head back against the wall, exhaustion and relief mingling in her breath. "I don't even know your name," she murmured. "Silas," he said. "Silas," she repeated softly, as if saying it made her safer. "Thank you." He didn't answer, just stared into the fire until its glow blurred in his eyes. Somewhere in that orange light, he saw his wife's face again, his daughter's tiny fingers, and the grave he'd left behind years ago. And then he looked at the small hand now wrapped in his coat, the same buzz, the same warmth, and he knew that for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone in the storm anymore. The fire popped. Hazel stirred faintly. Evelyn reached out, brushing the child's cheek, then glanced at Silas. "Do you think she'll live?" He met her gaze, steady but honest. "If she's got your strength, she will." Evelyn smiled through tears, her lips trembling. The storm eased to a drizzle outside, the first light of dawn crawling over the horizon. In the quiet between thunder and sunrise, two broken souls sat close to the fire, listening to a child's fragile breath, proof that hope, though late, had finally found its way home. Silas was outside already, chopping wood in the gray dawn. His shirt clung to his back, damp from sweat and mist. Each swing of the axe was sharp and deliberate, the rhythm steady, like he was trying to split apart his thoughts along with the logs. He'd been awake since before light. Sleep had never come easy since the night he'd buried his own family. And now, with the sound of that little girl's breathing echoing faintly from inside, he couldn't close his eyes without feeling something stir that he thought had died years ago. Evelyn watched him from the doorway, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The sight of him, the broad frame, the quiet focus, The way he worked like the world owed him punishment made her chest tighten. She had known men who looked strong but were nothing inside, hollow with anger or drink. Silas was different. He moved like someone who had lost everything but still kept living out of obligation to the ghost watching him. When he noticed her, he paused mid-swing. Their eyes met for a moment before he set the axe aside and gave a brief nod. "She's still holding on?" Evelyn smiled faintly, breathing steady through the night. "The fever's gone down a little." He nodded again, relief flickering across his face so fast she almost missed it. "There's broth on the stove." "Ain't much, but it'll warm her. I can make it," she said, stepping back to let him inside. He hesitated at the door, brushing the rain from his sleeves before entering. The cabin felt smaller in the morning light. Walls of rough pine, shelves lined with tools, jars, a rifle above the door. A life lived in silence. Evelyn knelt near the hearth, feeding the fire and stirring what little food was left in the pot. Hazel slept beside her, cheeks faintly pink again. The sound of her tiny breaths was the only melody in the room. Silas crouched nearby, checking the herbs drying on the wall. "Used to keep more medicine around," he murmured. "Guess I stopped expecting anyone would need it." Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. "Were you a doctor?" He shook his head. "Just a ranch medic. Learned a few things from my wife. She knew how to heal with her hands, not just tools." His voice faltered. "Folk didn't much care for her ways." Evelyn didn't ask more. The way he said wife carried the weight of something buried deep. She ladled a little broth into a cup, cooled it, and touched it to Hazel's lips. The girl stirred, swallowing weakly. Evelyn smiled through tears. "That's it, sweetheart." Just a little. Silas turned away, pretending to check the firewood, but the sight of mother and child together burned behind his eyes. He hadn't realized how loud silence could be until someone filled it again. By afternoon, the rain began to lift from the valley. A patch of blue opened in the sky, pale and hesitant. Evelyn hung Hazel's small blanket near the hearth to dry, humming softly under her breath. Silas sat at the table, sharpening a knife, his movements slow and rhythmic. "You sing pretty," he said quietly. She smiled without looking up. "Just a lullaby my mama used to hum when storms scared me." She said it was for calling light back. "Seems to be working," he said, glancing toward the window where a thin ray of sun broke through the clouds. Evelyn looked at him, then, the corner of her mouth lifting. "You don't talk much, do you?" "Never found much good in words," he said. "They don't change what's already gone." "Maybe not," she said gently, "but sometimes they remind us we're still here." He didn't answer. His gaze drifted to Hazel, now sleeping peacefully, her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. The sight pulled something raw from deep inside him. When his daughter had died, he'd built walls around every memory of her. Now those walls were cracking. As the day wore on, Evelyn tried to help where she could. She cleaned the corner of the cabin, washed dishes in a basin, folded a few tattered blankets. Silas watched her move, quietly impressed. She wasn't fragile, not like he'd first thought when he found her in the rain. There was a quiet grit in her, a will that had survived things most wouldn't. Near dusk, she went outside to fetch water from the creek behind the cabin. The air was cold but clear, and the forest smelled of pine and wet earth. She crouched by the stream, watching the ripples catch the fading light. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe without fear. She didn't hear Silas step up behind her until he spoke. "Creek's cold this time of year. Careful you don't freeze your hands." Evelyn turned slightly, startled, then smiled. "I've survived worse." "I don't doubt it." He handed her a tin cup. Their fingers brushed. The touch was small but lingered longer than either expected. "Thank you," she said softly. Silas nodded, staring out at the forest. "You shouldn't have been out there alone. It's a hard country, harder on those who still believe in kindness." Evelyn looked down at the water. "Kindness doesn't die easy," she murmured. "It just hides where it's safe." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his chest ached. She wasn't just a mother trying to save her child. She was a woman who had been broken by the world and still found the strength to keep walking through rain and rejection. As they walked back toward the cabin, Evelyn asked, "What made you come out here? Away from people?" "People," he said, simply. Then, after a pause, After the war, after losing my wife and little girl, I thought the mountain might be quieter than the noise in my head. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shrugged, though the weight of it was heavy in his voice. Don't be. I buried him myself, told God I'd never touch another dying soul again. Guess he wasn't done with me. When they reached the cabin, the sun was gone. The forest glowed silver under a rising moon. Hazel was awake, blinking drowsily at the firelight. Evelyn scooped her up, tears glistening in her eyes. Silas sat nearby, watching the reunion as though afraid to breathe too loudly and break it. Later, as the fire burned low, Evelyn whispered, "You said your wife knew how to heal. What was her name?" He stared into the flames, jaw tight. May. The name left his mouth like a confession. She used to say every wound has two sides, the part that bleeds and the part that learns. Evelyn listened, her eyes soft. She sounded wise. She was. Too wise for this world. A quiet fell between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Hazel slept between them, the faint crackle of the fire filling the space where grief used to live. Evelyn looked over after a while. Do you ever think about leaving this place? Silas shook his head slowly. Ain't nowhere to go. The world don't forget men like me. Easier to stay where the ghosts already know my name. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's true. But ghosts can't hold you forever. He turned to her, eyes meeting hers across the small room. Maybe they can't. But I don't rightly know who I'd be without them. You could be someone who saves people again, she said quietly. The words struck him deeper than she could have known. For a long time he didn't respond. The only sound was the slow, steady breathing of the child between them. Then, at last, he said, You ought to rest. The storm might have passed, but another could come. Evelyn nodded, lying down beside Hazel, her hand still resting on the child's back. Silas stayed by the fire, the orange light flickering across his face. He looked at the woman sleeping beside her daughter, the image of life he thought he'd never see again, and felt something shift inside him. He leaned forward, stirring the coals, whispering under his breath, If this is another storm, let it take me last. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, gentle now, carrying away the scent of rain and smoke. And inside that small cabin, for the first time in years, warmth had returned not from the fire, but from the fragile heartbeat of three souls learning how to live again. The days after the storm passed quietly, like the world was afraid to make noise again. Morning light filtered through the pines, golden and soft, catching the steam that rose from the cabin's chimney. Evelyn had found a rhythm here, fetching water from the creek, feeding the fire, washing what little clothes they had. Hazel had color in her cheeks again. She laughed sometimes now, a sound so light it made Silas stop whatever he was doing just to listen. He had begun to talk more, though never about himself unless she asked. He showed Evelyn how to grind willow bark for fever, how to boil pine needles for tea, how to mend a torn shirt using sinew instead of thread. She learned fast. Sometimes when their hands brushed over the table or when their eyes met above the flames, something unspoken filled the air between them. Neither dared name it, not yet. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Silas pulled out an old wooden box from beneath the floorboards. He opened it slowly, revealing a few photographs, yellowed and bent. Evelyn leaned forward. Is that your wife? She asked softly. He nodded, his eyes distant. May and little Clara, the last picture I took before the fever came through town. His thumb brushed the edge of the photograph. When they were gone, I buried them on the ridge and swore I'd never take another picture. Never build another fire for anyone but myself. Evelyn's voice trembled. And yet, here you are, keeping one burning for us. He looked up at her, startled, then smiled faintly. Guess some oaths ain't meant to last. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of Hazel's soft breathing filled the space. The fire popped. Silas closed the box carefully and set it aside, as if finally laying something to rest. Later that night, thunder rolled again in the distance, but no rain followed. Silas stepped outside, scanning the valley. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. His horse, Jasper, shifted restlessly near the fence. Silas's hand instinctively went to the revolver on his hip. When he came back inside, Evelyn noticed the change in his face. What is it? Tracks, he said quietly. Riders passed near the creek today. 5 or 6 horses, maybe more. Could just be ranchers, she offered, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, he muttered, but the kind that ride quiet in a line like that, they ain't carrying hay that night. He didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the dark, the rifle across his knees. Evelyn pretended to rest, but could feel the tension in him like electricity in the air. She didn't ask what he feared. She already knew. The next morning, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The birds were silent, the air sharp. Silas moved with restless purpose, checking the stable, oiling his rifle, cutting more wood than they needed. Evelyn tried to keep the day normal for Hazel, reading her a story and singing quietly, though her voice shook. It was near noon when the sound came, the distant rhythm of hooves, faint but unmistakable. Silas froze mid-step. The axe slipped from his hand. Evelyn's eyes went wide. He crossed to her in 2 strides. Take Hazel. Go to the cellar. Don't come out till I say Silas. Now, Evelyn. His tone left no room for argument. She obeyed, clutching Hazel to her chest as she lifted the cellar door behind the stove. She could hear the horses drawing closer, their hooves crunching in the wet dirt. She whispered a prayer as she lowered the child into the dark, kissing her forehead before pulling the door shut. Silas stepped out into the yard, the rifle in his hands. The first rider appeared from the trees, tall, wearing a black coat, his hat low, a smirk cutting through his stubbled face. Behind him came 4 more, rifles slung, eyes mean. Well, I'll be, the leader drawled. Didn't expect to find a hermit guarding someone else's woman. Silas recognized him immediately. Garrett Cole. The name tasted like ash. You're a long way from town. Garrett grinned. Got business. Heard tell a woman ran off with a deadbeat's debt unpaid. Turns out she's shacked up with the famous Silas Ward, the outlaw with a preacher's conscience. Silas's grip tightened. You'll turn that horse around if you know what's good for you. The other men laughed. Garrett dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. See, that's the problem, Silas. You keep thinking the world cares about what's good. He glanced at the cabin. She in there? Silas stepped between him and the door. You won't lay a finger on her. Garrett's smirk faded. Move or I'll send you to join your ghosts. Silas didn't move. The silence stretched, broken only by the steady drip of water from the eaves. Then Garrett swung first, fast and brutal. The rifle cracked against Silas's jaw, sending him staggering. Before he could fall, he twisted, slamming his shoulder into Garrett's chest. They went down in the mud, fists flying, boots scraping. The other men moved to circle them. Silas lunged for the rifle, but one of the riders kicked it away. Another drew his gun. The barrel glinted in the gray light. Then a sudden sound cut through the chaos. A cry. Hazel's cry. The men froze. The sound came from inside the cabin, small but sharp as a bell. Evelyn's instinct had betrayed her. She had thrown herself over Hazel to quiet her, but it was too late. Garrett grinned through bloodied teeth. Looks like I found what I came for. Before he could move, Silas slammed his fist into Garrett's throat. The man gagged, stumbling back. Silas grabbed the dropped rifle and fired a single shot into the air. The crack echoed through the valley like thunder. Birds scattered from the trees. The other riders hesitated. You take another step, Silas growled, and I'll put every one of you in the ground before sundown. Garrett coughed, spitting blood, but laughed. Still playing the hero, Ward? Ain't no redemption for men like us. Silas leveled the rifle at his chest. Maybe not, but there's mercy for the ones behind us. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Garrett sneered. You don't have the stones. The rifle fired. The shot tore through Garrett's shoulder, spinning him sideways. His horse reared, whinnying. The others panicked, scrambling to mount up. Silas chambered another round, firing into the air again, not to kill, but to send them running. And they did, leaving Garrett writhing in the mud. When the last hoofbeats faded, Silas lowered the gun, chest heaving. Blood dripped from his mouth, his knuckles raw. He turned toward the cabin just as Evelyn burst through the door, Hazel clutched in her arms. She ran to him, voice shaking. Are you hurt? He laughed once, breathless. Not bad enough to bury yet. She touched his face, fingers trembling. You saved us. He met her eyes, quiet and fierce. No, I just made sure no one else lost what I already did. Garrett groaned, trying to crawl away. Silas walked over, boots sinking into the mud beside him. The man looked up, rage burning in his eyes. You'll never outrun your past, Ward. Silas knelt beside him. I ain't running anymore. He stood, turning back toward Evelyn. The sky was breaking open above them, the clouds parting at last. Sunlight spilled across the soaked ground, glinting on the rifle barrel, on Hazel's golden hair, on the blood that soaked Silas's sleeve. Evelyn stepped forward, voice soft but steady. Come inside. Please. He hesitated, then nodded. Inside, she cleaned the cut on his jaw, wrapping his wrist in fresh linen. Hazel, drowsy again, slept between them on the bed. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence this time wasn't fear. It was relief, raw and trembling. Finally, Evelyn said, You didn't have to fight for us. Silas looked at her, his voice low. You came to me asking for a burial, but somehow you gave me something to live for. Her eyes shimmered. She reached up, brushing the dirt from his cheek. Then maybe we both buried something tonight. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and rain-washed earth. Inside, beneath the fading light, 3 souls sat together, bloodied, shaken, but unbroken. And for the first time, Silas Ward let himself believe that redemption wasn't found in graves, but in the hands you choose to save. Inside, Evelyn was singing softly. Her voice drifted through the open door, steady and low, wrapping around the morning like sunlight through fog. Hazel sat on her lap, playing with a wooden horse Silas had carved years ago and never thrown away. The sight of them together, one laughing, one humming, felt like something sacred. When Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, her dress brushed against the wood, damp from washing. You should rest, she said, her tone halfway between kindness and command. I've rested enough, he replied. A man can't sit too long, or he starts remembering too much. You fought off 5 men yesterday, she said, folding her arms. You earned a day of remembering. Silas smiled faintly. You sound like May when she wanted me to stop working the fields. Her eyes softened. She must have been a good woman. The best I ever knew, he said, then paused. Until now. The words hung there between them, soft but certain. Evelyn looked down, her cheeks coloring, then turned her gaze toward the horizon. Garrett's men won't stay gone, she said quietly. They'll tell stories in town, twist what happened. Let them, Silas said. Truth's a stubborn thing. It don't die easy. She leaned against the porch rail, the breeze catching her hair. I don't want to bring you trouble. You didn't bring me trouble, he said. You brought me back. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the creek nearby and Hazel's giggle from inside filled the silence. The child's laughter cut through the remnants of fear still clinging to the cabin. Each sound like a small piece of healing falling into place. By midday, Silas took a spade and walked out to the edge of the yard. The soil was soft from the rain. Evelyn followed, curious. What are you doing? He dug into the earth, slow and deliberate, until the outline of a shallow trench formed. This place floods easy, he said. Need a trench to keep the water from seeping in when the next storm comes. She knelt beside him, helping to lift the damp soil with her hands. You could have waited, she said, though she smiled as she said it. He shook his head. Some things you fix before they break again. As the hours passed, they worked side by side. Their hands brushed often, their laughter echoing softly over the land. When they finished, Silas leaned on the spade, breath heavy, sweat glistening on his brow. Evelyn wiped mud from her cheek with the back of her hand and looked at the cabin. It's not much, she said, but it's standing. He looked at her then, the sunlight catching in her eyes. That's more than I've been able to say about myself in a long time. That evening they ate together by the fire. Hazel slept between them again, her tiny hand curled around a strand of her mother's hair. Evelyn watched the flames flicker and dance, her thoughts quiet for the first time in months. When I left the ranch, she said softly, I thought I was walking toward my grave. Every mile, every prayer, I just wanted a place to lay her down. I didn't think anyone in this world would still answer a stranger's cry. Silas looked into the fire, his jaw tight. You found me instead. I did, she whispered. And you breathed life into her, into me. He said nothing, just stared at the flames. But after a moment, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. Evelyn's eyes met his and neither looked away. "You've done enough for us," she said after a while. "You don't have to keep us." He smiled faintly. "You think I'd let you walk back into a world that tried to bury you?" "No, ma'am, this land's big enough for the three of us. I've got more ghosts than space anyhow. Might as well make room for the living." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "And if the world comes knocking again, then I'll answer it," he said, "but not alone this time." The fire crackled, filling the silence. Evelyn reached across the space between them, her hand resting on his. "You keep saying you lost everything," she whispered. "But maybe you were just waiting for the right reason to build again." His fingers closed gently around hers. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I was waiting for you." Outside, the moon rose high, silvering the pines and turning the valley into a sea of light. The wind carried the scent of wild sage and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the mountains answered with silence. Days turned into weeks. Garrett Cole never came back. The world, it seemed, had forgotten the woman who cried in the rain and the cowboy who didn't let her drown in sorrow. Evelyn and Silas built new fences around the cabin, mended the roof, and planted a small garden behind the barn. Hazel grew stronger every day, chasing sunlight with a laugh that could outshine it. Sometimes Silas would carve toys for her while Evelyn sewed at the table. She would look up from her stitching and find him watching her, that quiet half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. And sometimes she'd blush like a girl seeing kindness for the first time. One late afternoon, the sky turned gold before dusk, and the air felt heavy with coming rain. Silas stood near the door, looking at the ridge where he had buried his wife years ago. He walked there as the first drops began to fall, Evelyn following with Hazel in her arms. The grave was simple, marked with a wooden cross weathered by time. He knelt, brushing dirt from the carved name. Evelyn set Hazel down beside him. The child placed a tiny flower at the base of the cross. Silas swallowed hard. "She'd have liked you," he said softly to Evelyn. May. She was the kind that could see the good in anyone, even when they didn't deserve it. Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then maybe she sent us here." Silas looked up, meeting her gaze through the soft curtain of rain. Maybe she did. They stood there in silence, the three of them beneath the open sky. The rain didn't sting anymore. It felt like a blessing, washing the last traces of grief from the earth. When they returned to the cabin, Silas lit a lantern and began carving something into the wood above the doorway. Evelyn watched as the letters took shape under his careful hands. When he stepped back, she read them aloud. "Keep them breathing." He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "That's what May used to say when she healed the sick. Guess I understand it now." That night, as the rain whispered against the roof, Evelyn wrote in a small leather-bound journal she'd found in one of Silas's drawers. Her handwriting trembled but flowed steady. "I came here to bury my daughter. Instead, a stranger buried my sorrow and gave us both another chance at life." Silas finished carving a small wooden horse by the fire. He placed it beside Hazel, who was already half asleep. Evelyn closed the journal, her eyes meeting his across the flickering light. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Outside, the valley slept under a soft veil of rain. Inside, three hearts beat in quiet harmony. The sound of a family born not of blood, but of mercy. Silas reached for Evelyn's hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it felt like the storm had finally found its rest.